The Battle of Okinawa was one of the final showdowns before the United States would find itself on the Japanese mainland. On April 1st, 1945, more than 60,000 soldiers and Marines landed ashore at the beaches of Okinawa. The landings that morning went relatively unopposed, as the Japanese refused to fight on the beaches. The Japanese wanted to make sure that the U.S. casualties were as high as possible, so they withdrew into the caves and rocky hills to force this battle of attrition. This Japanese strategy worked well, as the U.S. suffered heavily not only on the islands but also with extensive Japanese kamikaze attacks that caused significant damage to U.S. fleets. 26 ships were ultimately sunk, and over 168 boats were severely damaged. 40% of all U.S. dead in this battle were sailors lost to these attacks. Though this was a decisive battle for the U.S., the Japanese plan had worked and led to over 12,000 American killed. This came at an even higher cost, though, for the Japanese, as 100,000 soldiers and civilians were killed. One of those brave men who lost their lives was Ernie Pyle, who was a newspaper columnist during World War II. Ernie was well known as a war correspondent who wrote columns about what it was like to be an ordinary soldier and the struggles that they faced every day. In honor of the many who lost their lives in Okinawa, we will take a look at one man who tried to find understanding for those soldiers and send it back home with his writing. Ernie was born on August 3rd, 1900, and was raised on a farm in Dana, Indiana. Though he was born and raised on a farm, he ended up hating it, so shortly after graduating from high school, he decided to enroll in the Naval Reserve. In 1919, he enrolled at Indiana University, but before he could finish his degree, he was hired at La Porte Herald. He then joined the Washington, D.C. Daily News, part of the Scripps Howard newspaper. In 1925, he met his wife, Jerry, from Minnesota. After they married and quit their jobs, they both traveled over 9,000 miles During his travels, Ernie still wrote columns for the Scripps Howard paper, but after their many miles of travel, they decided to stop and build a home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. One of his famous quotes was, "I love the infantry because they are the underdogs. They are mud, rain, frost, and wind boys. They have no comforts and even learn to live without necessities, and in the end, they are the guys that wars cannot be won without." Ernie went into the military as a reporter and became well known from writing The Common Foot Soldier and doing things as suggesting extra pay for combat soldiers. Throughout his career overseas, he was in many different countries and at different fronts of the war, such as England, France, Italy, and North Africa. After returning from the liberation of Paris, Ernie accepted his next and last assignment, which would be to cover the Pacific War with the Navy and Marines. Though not long into the operation on April 18, 1945, while trying to duck away in a ditch, he was killed by a Japanese machine gunner. Though his time in the war had ended, his legacy did not, because at the time of his death, he had 400 daily and 300 weekly newspapers. The soldiers of the 77th Infantry Division, which Ernie was with, paid tribute by putting up a sign that read, "At this spot, the 77th Infantry Division lost a buddy, Ernie Pyle, April 18th, 1945. Upon his death on April 18th, it was announced by Navy Secretary James V. Forrestal and President Truman, in which he said, "The nation is quickly saddened again by the death of Ernie Pyle. No man in this war has so well told the story of American fighting man as American fighting man wanted it told. He deserves the gratitude of all of his countrymen." Ernie Pyle lived a full life reporting on many fronts and delivering real-life stories and updates to millions back in the United States. Over those many years of service, he distinguished himself with many awards and had just as many memorials built. Some of his accolades included a Pulitzer Prize, being featured on the cover of Time magazine, honorary doctorates from the University of New Mexico and Indiana University, a Medal of Merit, and a Purple Heart, which is rarely given to civilians.